Teachers really love their own classrooms, don't they? It's part of your identity, it's part of your space, it's how you like to teach. You have everything set up in your own way, and then bam, you suddenly have to share your classroom with another teacher, or you might be in a position this year where you're having to share somebody else's classroom. And this can actually add quite a lot of teacher stress and anxiety. And in this episode, I'm going to share with you some really great tips and tricks for this situation. I'm Rachel Hardman, and this is Passionate About Music Education. The reason for this episode came about a situation in my current school where staff are now having to rotate while the students stay in one specific classroom because of guidelines we've been given. And we were sat in a staff meeting and quite a few questions came up that were really very much rooted in teacher stress. And a lot of staff had never experienced sharing a classroom. We're lucky in my school that everybody has their own teaching space. And I found it quite a strange conversation to have, because having taught for nearly 25 years and had people share with my room or having to share other people's room, it was something that I'd experienced before. But actually, when you sort of sit back, really, your classroom, your teaching space, you have it designed in the way you want it. You have your room laid out. You have your musical equipment in an order that works for you and safe, so that the instrument's protected and lasts for a long time. You have your wall displays up. You have your own unique identity attached to that room. You have the technology working in the way that you want it to. Becoming a borrower of somebody else's room is really tricky to do, and it can cause quite a lot of friction between staff. So here are some top tips that I shared with my colleagues that I'm sharing with you today. So in an effort to ensure that we feel comfortable in any teaching space, we have the owner of the room and the borrower of the room. The owner of the room needs to make designated storage space for everybody who's borrowing the room. It's really hard if you're coming in and out of different classrooms to keep carrying heavy books or equipment, so you do need a space. So the owner of the room, the original teacher, needs to make space that is a designated space for that teacher within the room that they can store equipment. And that's also the place where if they leave all their equipment lying around, you can put it in as the owner. You can place it back. So that space is for that teacher who's borrowing the room. That's really important. If a room is being shared, then there should be a general stock of stationery, teacher stationery, your pens, your board erasers, the lined paper, paper for the printer, and it is everybody's responsibility to keep that stocked. There's nothing worse than you going from one classroom to another, you turn up to the room, expecting to find a board pen, and it's not there because there are none left and nobody's actually replaced it, or somebody's picked it up and taken it by mistake. So whether you're the owner of the room or the borrower of the room, it's really important that there is continuously stationery in that room to make teaching quick and efficient. This also goes for technology. The owner of the room, if you're in there first, make sure you put all your projector on, put on the computer, turn the printer on, and make sure that all the audio equipment is working, so that the next person who walks in, might be running late from the class that they've just been in or the other side of the school, can literally just come in, turn straight on the computer, go straight onto the computer and go into their lessons. Not everybody has a laptop, and even if they do have a laptop, they still need to have access to all the wiring connections to link up with the projector, smartboard, technology, whatever you have in your room. That's really important. That's First of all, the owner of the room explains how it's all set up so that people don't mess up your settings, and so that when you come back to turn on your stereo, people haven't unplugged all the cables from the computer, and also that the borrowers know how to use it. Unlike stationery, it's everybody's responsibility to flag an issue with technology when it happens. It's no good just expecting the owner of the room to know that the Wi-Fi connection has gone down, or the printer stopped working, or there's an issue. If you have a help desk, then when you email them straight away, make sure you copy all the users of the room in, so that they know that there was an issue, so that when they come into the room, if they were going to print 15 copies they know of a document, then they know in advance and they can go and do that elsewhere. The first person in the room is responsible for setting the room up, whether that's putting the AC on or turning the computer on, turning the projector on, the lights, etc., and making sure that it's a working space for everybody who's coming in and out of the room. And that also goes for the person who is the last in the room. And that might be a borrower, it might be back to the owner, but don't just walk out presuming that I'm borrowing this classroom, it's not mine, I don't need to turn off the printer or the projector or anything, and I can just walk out the door and I'll leave it for the owner to come and tidy up. You might find that the owner of the room as such is always working in there after school and would prefer to keep the computer on. So that's, again, an open communication that you need to have about what they expect if you're the last person in that room on a day. Making space to use the teacher desk is really important, and it's important that the owner of the room makes that space and clears the desk. There's nothing worse than trying to use a computer, trying to set up everything in that room, and then you're working over the owner's exercise books and personal documents and phones and whatever it is that they've just left on the desk, and you have no space to work. So again, make sure that you leave each other space to work during the lesson, because sometimes we have that like 2 minutes where we could just sit and just do something while children are working on a task. So it's important that you give each other space to be an efficient teacher. And this also is the same for the whiteboard. So if you're like most schools where you're writing objectives up on the board and the date and information, you might find that if you're in that room 2 or 3 times but you're teaching the same year group, particularly for music teachers, you might teach your year 7s or M1s more than once in a day. You want to keep up the information so you're not having to rewrite all those objectives. So then be clear about that. So put do not rub off, keep this on, explain that to the next teacher, but make sure that you leave space for them to work, because again, I've been in that experience as a borrower of a room where you've gone in and you're teaching a subject or you're doing a cover lesson, and the teacher's left everything on the board. You don't know whether you can rub it off or not, and then you rub off the tiny little space so you can do the work that you're doing, and then the teacher comes in, the owner of the room comes in and starts shouting. But again, if you're not being very clear, then it actually puts everybody in an uncomfortable position, and it's already stressful enough having to share rooms and move around. So anything that we can do to reduce that stress and that confusion is good. So if you want something to stay up on the board, be clear about it, but also be gracious in the fact that the other teacher may need board space too. And this is my final tip, and it's probably the one that upsets teachers most when they're in this position of being the owner or the borrower, is the fact that you must leave the room ready for the next teacher to go back in and work. Because again, if we are coming in and out of classes and we've got a 1 minute changeover, what you don't want to do is spend time tidying up the desk, rearranging the room, picking up rubbish off the floor, picking up worksheets that people have left behind on desks, or the kids haven't been managed in that respect, having to clean the board, having to put everything back into a room before you can teach. That kind of stuff is not really fair, and it creates animosity. So whenever you leave a room, leave it in the state that you want to find it in. However much you're pushed to time, make sure that you leave time for that, because that does cause kerfuffles and animosity amongst staff. So I hope these tips have been helpful, and remember that teachers associate their classrooms with the personal identity as a teacher, and that the space represents who they are, their style of teaching, their rapport with the students. So actually a classroom is much more than just a space to work in. It's actually an extension of your style of teaching, and I'm sure you know that because you'll have spent a lot of time in your classroom. You spend nearly 40 hours a week in there, making it a space that you want to be in, that children are engaged in, children are happy to learn in, as a safe environment. So that when you're now in a position where you might be sharing a classroom, although you want to keep all of that feel to it, you also have to be aware that other people coming into the room also have to work in an identity themselves, and they are stepping into your identity if you're the owner of the room. And of course, if you're a borrower of the room, you're stepping into somebody's identity, and that can actually cause some anxiety and a bit of stress, because it's not that safe environment that you're used to teaching in and feel comfortable. So there's a lot of like fear and identity and confidence that can get lost in this, which people seem to forget. So the more we can do to understand that as teachers, of what our colleagues are going to feel when they come in and use our room, or when we go in and use their room, then the happier we'll all be, and the smoother it'll work. It is up to us to try and keep those open communications going. And I know that's really hard at times when we're stressed and rushing from one classroom to another, and a piece of technology doesn't work, and that upsets the flow of your lesson. I really hope these tips have been helpful, and I hope we can all get back to keeping our rooms again very soon, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode. This is Passionate About Music Education. I'm Rachel Hardman. If you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you soon.